What's up guys, my name is William Wallace. I am a photographer and cinematographer based out of Orange County, California, and today I wanted to make a video on what I think the best settings for shooting video on the Canon EOS R are. So hopefully this video is still relevant, especially given the recent announcement of the Canon EOS R5. But anyways, since I've shot a fair amount of video with the EOS R, which I'm actually shooting this video on right now, I figured I would give you my settings. So don't take them as rules necessarily, but I guess more guidelines to follow to get higher quality video, at least in my opinion. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously switch the camera from photo to video mode. We're going to press on that top mode dial and then tap on the info button, and it'll switch us over to the video mode. From there, I like to set up each custom function shooting mode according to the different frame rates and resolutions that the camera is capable of. So for manual video mode, I usually make it my most used frame rate and resolution, which is 1080p at 24 fps. And then for C1, I like to do 4K at 24 fps. C2, I do 1080 at 60. And then C3, I rock 720-120 on the rare occasion that I need 120 frames in that outdated resolution. For the 1080p and 4K resolutions, I am shooting all-eye to get the best quality out of the camera. The first thing I would recommend doing is actually enabling CLog so that you can maximize the dynamic range of your EOS R and really get a nice highlight roll off. I made a video about shooting CLog on the EOS R and all the different caveats and hurdles that come with it, and what I think the best settings for actually shooting CLog are, because it's a little more in depth than just turning it on. If you want to see that video, you can tap up on the screen and there should be a little box to view it. The other thing to note about CLog, if you do plan on enabling it and are going to watch the other video, you don't need to worry about picture style. But with that being said, if you're not planning on shooting in CLog, the best picture style in my opinion to use is to go over to one of the custom ones and just, you know, flatten the hell out of it, pull the saturation all the way down along with the contrast. You don't really have to touch the tone, but then also pull the sharpness down. I feel like it gives it the most natural look, and you can play with it more in post, versus if you shoot with the saturation all, you know, pumped up, you can't really mess around with it in post. So if you're shooting with a picture profile and not in CLog, I would recommend you just pull those settings down. If you are shooting in CLog, you don't have to worry about that because CLog kind of just replaces the camera's picture profile, if that makes sense. Yeah, the next thing I would actually recommend you doing, this helped me out a lot and I didn't figure out till later about the EOS R, is enabling the update of the custom function modes. So essentially, if you don't have this on, right, if it's disabled and you're shooting on your C1 mode, 4K 24, and you raise the ISO to 400, right, you get your shot, and then you switch over to C2, 1080-60, get another shot. When you go back to C1, the ISO will be back to what it was before, so if it was 100. So if you enable this, just whenever you leave that mode and you come back to it, the settings are going to be the same as when you last left it. So it just makes the workflow a lot faster, I like to think. So I definitely recommend you enable that. It's super easy. So the next thing I would recommend you do, and I'm sure you've heard this all over YouTube already, or you probably already know it, it has to do with the exposure triangle when you're filming. I'd recommend changing your shutter speed to double the frame rate. So when you're shooting 24 FPS, it would be 1/48, but since this isn't a cinema camera, it just doesn't have the capability like a C100 or C200 may have. So you're gonna have to go with 1/50th, since, you know, 24 times 2 is 48, and then 50th is the closest you're gonna get. So knock it to 1/50th if you're shooting 24, and then, you know, so on with the different frame rates. If it's 60 FPS, shoot at 1/120th, and, you know, so on. And essentially what that's going to do is give you the most natural looking footage with a nice motion blur to it. You know, if you shoot at a high shutter speed in 24 FPS, it's just going to look very choppy, almost like a, you know, handheld fight scene or something where it's really choppy and everything's in focus. So I guess it just depends on what you're filming, but for the most part, I would stick to doubling the frame rate. So once you have your shutter speed actually set, I would recommend just keeping it there, keeping it locked in, unless you wanted to make a creative difference in the footage, and then you know, adjust your other settings accordingly. For white balance, it kind of depends on what you're shooting, but if it's more of like a narrative piece, I'd recommend going in manual mode so you can really dial it into the exact white balance. And lastly, this kind of also goes with, it depends on what you're shooting, but I would recommend you enable the face tracking autofocus, first of all, because it's out of this world and kick-ass, and it just follows. This whole time I've had the face autofocus enabled. And the other cool thing about the EOS R and all the new Canon mirrorless cameras is the eye autofocus. So right now it's actually tracking my eyeball. It might be switching back and forth, but it's tracking my eyeball and keeping it in focus. So that's really awesome, pretty innovative. It's going to be useful if you're shooting like an interview, you know, or something like that. where you don't necessarily have another operator for that camera. But for most instances, I think that the face tracking is the way to go for this camera. So hopefully this isn't super irrelevant, because I know that EOS R5 just came out, which I'm actually hoping to get my hands on down the line. And those specs are just out of this world with the 8K and everything. So if you are shooting on the EOS R still, it's a great camera, stick with it. And these are the settings I would recommend you use. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more content like this. I have other videos on the EOS R actually, and other Canon lenses and gear in the future. And yeah, I hope to make more content down the road, but leave a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time, guys. Peace out.